Good evening. Welcome to the Andrew Mellon Auditorium. Next year we might do it in the new ballroom at the White House. As many of you will know, the trade calls that commanding reveille the voice of God. And indeed, to the unwary, it can seem like the importunate summons of Yahweh addressing Job from the whirlwind. I think there are two reassuring things about this mundane reenactment of majesty. First, it is eminently practical. Everyone now knows both my name and the nature of my day job. The second reassuring thing, and something that distinguishes it sharply from the drama recounted in Job 38, is that we do not have to conjure with such questions as, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the world?" Thank goodness for small mercies. And since I've mentioned the subject of thanks, let me thank you all for joining us tonight for the 2025 Encounter Books Gala. A warm welcome alike to veterans and the many new recruits we have to this annual celebration of intelligence and political maturity. I'm delighted that you are here to help us memorialize Encounter's latest efforts at world conquest, and to honor my friends Amy Wax, winner of the 2025 Jean Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom, and Charles Kesler, winner of this year's Encounter Prize for advancing American ideals. We shall be hearing more about and from both honorees after getting outside the delicious repast prepared by the culinary geniuses at Design Cuisine, Washington's and probably the country's best caterer. And speaking of victuals, if I may alter the advice of Lady Macbeth, please do not stay upon the order of your eating, but dig in and eat at once. There are many people here tonight who deserve our thanks. I'm tempted to begin the evening by reciting the names of all of them. You will be pleased to hear, however, that unlike Oscar Wilde, who said that he could resist anything except temptation, I shall forbear to give in to that attractive lure. Nevertheless, I do want to mention a few key supporters of tonight's festivity. Leading the honor roll is the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, which is the conditio sine qua non not only of Encounter Books, but, as many people in this room have reason to know, of so many enlightened conservative endeavors. I also want to mention the extremely generous benefactions of CRC Advisors, the Hickory Foundation, the Thomas Klingenstein Foundation, and Tom and Diane Smith. Thanks to them all, and thanks to all our supporters. Now, even in this age of AI, you cannot really think about books without thinking about what Aristotle would probably call their efficient cause, namely authors. We are fortunate to have many Encounter authors with us tonight. Their work has done much to illuminate public discourse, unsettle the complacency, and correct the errors of our would-be masters in the corridors of power, and to bring to the rank and fetid unsafe, safe spaces of academia some of the hygienic ingenuity that Hercules brought to the Augean stables. So, thank you, Encounter authors, for your labors on behalf of the Republic. To continue with the subject of thanks, I want to mention the congregation of Jeeves-like experts at the Huell Events Group. They combine an attention to detail that the Prussian High Command would envy, together with a welcoming spirit that your grandmother would admire. Quite simply, they are the best. Finally, it is a pleasure to recognize my dedicated colleagues at Encounter Books, all of whom are here with us tonight. You can tell them by their halos. As I've pointed out on other occasions, Ralph Waldo Emerson said that an institution is the lengthened shadow of one man. But about this, as about so many things, that transcendental windbag was wrong. I know from my own experience that what we do at Encounter simply would not be possible without the talent and hard work of my colleagues. And I'm pleased to have this occasion to recognize their efforts. Now, those of you who are regulars at these gatherings have been hearing about the golden thread for the last couple of years. What started as an ambitious new history of the Western tradition has blossomed into a multi-front campaign to change the conversation about education and indeed our national self-understanding. I'm happy to report that the first volume of this magnificent work is now published. Copies, a few copies, are available for your admiration at the back of the room. And there will be a few for you lucky few to pick up at the end of tonight's festivities. A mention of the golden thread leads me to note that my friends Larry and Penny Arn are here with us tonight. If you do not already know that Larry is the president of Hillsdale College, I will pause for a moment while you rise and steal quietly away. No one is leaving. That's good. Now, I've often observed that Hillsdale is the best liberal arts college in America. While this is true, it is only part of the story. For Hillsdale is also at the center of an ambitious new effort to reclaim the liberties and the foundational energies of America. It has been an honor for us at Encounter to collaborate with Hillsdale on this project of national renewal, not only with the Golden Thread, but also with a host of other initiatives, including Bill McClay's dazzling new history of the United States, Land of Hope, an invitation to the great American story. I'm delighted that Bill could be with us tonight. And I'm pleased to say, I'm pleased to say that a new edition of Land of Hope is now in preparation and will be part of Golden Thread Academic, a new imprint from Encounter, and part of that project of world conquest that I mentioned earlier. You think I'm kidding about that, but I'm not. Now, crowded with friends though the hall is tonight, not everyone we invited was able to join us. So in closing, I would like to read a brief note that one promising newcomer sent us. I send my best wishes to all those attending the Encounter Books annual gala. For a quarter century, Encounter Books has championed the great writers that defend the Western tradition. This evening celebrates authors and thinkers whose writings exemplify the power of ideas to protect liberty and strengthen the foundations of a free society. As we approach our nation's 250th year of independence, we recognize that freedom endures only when we safeguard the ideals on which it was founded. All of you gathered here tonight are helping to carry them forward as you create, build, and write beautiful, powerful works that reflect our country's greatness. Congratulations to this year's honorees for continuing that legacy and inspiring future generations to do the same. Signed, Donald J. Trump. To which I will only add, thank you for your attention to this matter. I shall return soon, but for the moment I invite you to hearken to the video screens for an intellectual feast to complement the one that is before you on your plates.
One of the reasons we use narrative and tell stories and talk about stories is that stories are a better way of incorporating complex knowledge than the analysis, the isolation of the elements and distinct concepts. I wrote the book in a narrative style, and that was deliberate. I think it comes naturally to me, to the way I teach. What I came to understand is that a narrative allows you to incorporate a lot of things that may, if you view them in a strictly analytical way, seem incompatible with one another. You tell the story of actual people going about their business, forming a country, drawing on the moral systems and legal systems that they brought from Europe, adapting it in their own ways to their circumstances. It all makes a lot more sense. It's relatable, as they say. If you can tell the story in the right way, you can make people aware of this is a story they participate in. They participated in it from the first moment they came out of the womb and started screaming. It's important to acknowledge that story and to know the story. If you don't teach, it's not something you're going to pick up by osmosis. You know, the story, you have to be told the story. Just as in family life, you know, you don't know that your great-grandfather was, the head of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or a bank robber or whatever he may have been. That's part of the family story. And as you grow up, you become incorporated in the family by learning the story, including the dark corners, you know, because every family has dark corners. But that's being a part of the story is a part of membership, of belonging. It is one of the chief things that holds us together. There's something entirely natural about loving the things that are your own. And the story of this country is something that belongs to everyone who lives here.
Well, here we are again. I hope you all enjoyed the meal. So it's my pleasure to call up to the stage my friend Ilya Shapiro, the distinguished legal scholar and senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, to introduce Amy L. Wax, recipient of Encounters 2025 Jean Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom. But first, here is another brief video for your delight and delectation.
The Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize recognizes those who champion free speech and civil discourse against the enemies of academic freedom. The prize honors the legacy of Jeane Kirkpatrick, former ambassador to the United Nations and trailblazer in the fight for free speech in America. Kirkpatrick bravely defended academic speech in the 1980s when she stood down leftist student mobs who attempted to silence her talks on campuses across the nation. Tonight, Encounter Books is pleased to honor Amy L. Wax for bravely upholding the foundational liberty of free speech in public life. For decades, Wax has taught at the University of Pennsylvania as a professor of law. In 2017, she drew national attention for publicly criticizing diversity and admissions policies. She argued that universities often forsake merit for arbitrary ideological goals. Her remarks provoked intense backlash. Students and colleagues denounced her, claiming she caused them physical and emotional harm. Though her comments are unquestionably protected by academic freedom, Penn initiated a process in 2022 to strip Wax of tenure. 2 years later, university officials made the unprecedented decision to suspend her teaching duties for a full year. Wax's case has prompted free speech advocates to call her the canary in the coal mine for academic freedom. She continues her fight against Penn to this day. Wax's unflinching stand has made her a symbol of intellectual courage. Her case is a reminder that free expression is not guaranteed. It must be fought for, often at great personal cost. Please join Encounter Books in honoring Amy L. Wax with the Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Freedom.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute, Ilya Shapiro.
I'm glad the voice of God spoke there because the video concluded with, please join us in celebrating Amy Wax, and that's not me. But thanks to Encounter Books for the honor of introducing one of my heroes, Amy Wax. She has had a marvelous and wide-ranging career with stints in the Solicitor General's office, where she argued 15 cases before the Supreme Court, and as a neurologist before beginning her career as a legal academic. That's right, she's both a JD and an MD, which I'm sure made her parents very proud. On faculty at Penn for a quarter century, she personifies the ideal of a public intellectual, while also winning multiple teaching awards. Indeed, I got a hold of some of her most recent teaching evaluations, where students not only rated her a median 5 out of 5, but provided a thesaurus of superlatives, gushing that she teaches, quote, the best class I've had in law school. One student added that, quote, her powers of explanation and exposition far exceed those of any other professor, unquote. It's appropriate that we honor Professor Wax tonight because the battle she's been fighting epitomizes the crisis in higher education, one thrust into the national discourse after Hamas's attack on Israel. The last 2 years have revealed that the heart of anti-Semitism in America lies on campus, among the most educated and so-called progressive people in the country. I mention that because it's evocative. As Bill Ackman put it in an essay published the day Claudine Gay resigned Harvard's presidency, anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, a leading indicator of underlying pathologies, which in this case means everything from cancel culture to indoctrination, intellectual corruption to moral decay. We've seen a subversion of the core mission of universities to seek truth and knowledge, and of classical liberal values like free speech, due process, equality under the law. It's been a shift from education to activism. The root cause of all of this is a noxious postmodern ideology that contends that truth is subjective and must be viewed through lenses of race, gender, and other identity categories, according to some privilege hierarchy. Your rights and freedoms depend on whether you're part of a class deemed oppressor or oppressed. Amy Wax knows this and calls it out, which is why she's endured cancellation campaigns since before we started talking about cancel culture. It all began, as the video noted, in September 2017, after she wrote an op-ed arguing that the decline of bourgeois values has contributed to social ills and that not all cultures are able to prepare people to become productive members of society. She later criticized Penn's racial preferences for leading to black students ending up in lower tiers of achievement, an obvious proof of mismatch. Dean Ted Ruger announced that Amy would no longer teach mandatory first-year classes because she had supposedly violated university policies against discussing student grades. A couple of years later, after Amy said at a conference that we should take immigrants from countries with cultures similar to our own, students held a town hall at which Dean Ruger said her comments were racist and had caused harm, quote unquote. He also said that it, quote, sucks that she worked there. And that's a legal term of art some of you might not understand. An outside investigator found that the charges against Amy were baseless, but Penn sat on that report. And then in December 2021, Ruger launched an official disciplinary inquiry, incorporating the disproved claims into his list of charges. Ruger asked the Faculty Senate to impose major sanctions in the process that had been used just a handful of times. In fact, the last time that Penn had acted to get rid of a tenured professor, it was because he had killed his wife. In June 2023, the Faculty Senate recommended a public reprimand, a one-year suspension at half pay, the removal of Amy's named chair and summer pay, and a requirement that she note in public appearances that she didn't speak for the law school. The university confirmed these sanctions last September. And apparently Penn is making an example of Amy in more ways than one, having already made her teach in a fishbowl. Here's how another of those course evaluations put it. Quote, I think the law school should provide a better classroom space for those taking this or any wax course, given the public scrutiny placed on her and those who would dare enroll in her class. It felt as though we were on display for others to observe, akin to some zoo exhibition, unquote. Amy's case raises intense concerns about the future of academic freedom, particularly since it's a persecution led by lawyers. It could well be that we're past peak woke in society more generally, but we may have passed the point of no return in terms of the illiberal takeover of higher education. And that's particularly dangerous in law schools, which train the gatekeepers of our political and legal institutions. And I do mean illiberal. I want to be clear about this. What we're seeing is not the decades-old conservative complaint about liberal professors. Indeed, those Berkeley hippies who took over the faculty lounge in the 60s would now be considered retrograde white supremacists. And we have weak leaders who placate these illiberal leftist mobs. University officials facilitate and even foment social justice mobs, with everyone else keeping their head down so as not to be caught in the cancellation crossfire. Claudine Gay, Harvard's former president, crystallizes the larger problem. Gay is a mediocre academic who was elevated for advancing progressive orthodoxy while checking intersectional boxes. She's the apotheosis of an anti-intellectual movement that values DEI, identity, and activism over truth-seeking, merit, and education. That movement is designed to prefer commissars over scholars. Amy Wax is the opposite. She is, quote, genuinely eager to engage with students' ideas and challenges them to think critically about the topics discussed in class, as one student wrote. Her seminar is a true masterclass in intellectual engagement, deftly intertwining rigorous analysis, historical context, and an unmatched depth of knowledge, wrote another. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating this year's recipient of the Jean Kirkpatrick Award for Academic Freedom, Professor Amy Wax.
I am greatly honored to be here at the Gala with so many distinguished guests and to receive the Jeane Kirkpatrick Prize for Academic Courage. And I want to thank Encounter Books and Roger Kimball for this wonderful award. I also thank others who have been with me on my journey as an academic dissident, now 7 years long and counting. These include members of my family, my husband, Dr. Roger Cohen, an oncologist and professor of medicine at Penn, as well as my 3 children and their spouses and families. One, Isaac Cohen, and his wife, Carrie Mullins, are here tonight. I must add, however, that my children have thanked me for not changing my name when I got married. Let's face it, Mom, they say, it's good that we don't have the same last name as you. I am also especially grateful to Paul Levy, Penn Law alum and donor, to other donors, the Academic Freedom Alliance, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, for their unwavering support. Now, I have only a few minutes to speak to this distinguished audience, and I want to begin with a story. But before the story, a little background is in order, and Ilya has already given you some. This year, I have been suspended by my home institution at half pay. Why? The Faculty Senate identified my infraction as, quote, inequitably targeted disrespect, unquote, a completely made-up phrase. This is the same Senate that has convened a faculty panel on viewpoint diversity next week, and you can guess who was not invited to participate. Perhaps one of the few professors on campus who actually voted for Trump. In disciplining me, the Faculty Senate cited a farrago, a dog's breakfast of remarks in the media and at conferences, which they mostly distorted, and a handful of alleged statements to students, which are almost wholly fabricated. Although Penn described my suspension to the judge in my lawsuit against them as, quote, just a teaching sabbatical, Penn proceeded to take away my ID, my office, my library privileges, access to Penn buildings, travel money, and all research funds forever. That's like no teaching sabbatical that ever was. But that's just one instance of Penn's mendacity and duplicity. I can state with confidence that if places like Penn can treat conservative professors like me, and not just housebroken ones, as they are treating me, and with impunity, higher ed will never be reformed. And it isn't badly in need of reform. But back to my story. Not long after my penalty went into effect, one of my husband's colleagues at Penn Med, a surgeon wearing a bow tie, and we know what that means, asked him a question none of his colleagues have ever asked, preferring to pretend I don't exist. Hey, how is your wife doing these days? In a moment of inspiration, no exception for him, he replied, well, she's okay. It helps to be resilient, and it helps to be right. Now, as much as I was gratified by that answer, it immediately called to my mind an aphorism that all law students learn, from Learned Hand, a distinguished and respected appeals court judge who famously said that the spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right. So that raises a question. How can we be right and fortified in our conviction of being right and still maintain the spirit that is not too sure if it is right? How can we blend requisite certainty with appropriate uncertainty? Well, I have only 8 minutes left, and this is a hard exam question, but I will take a quick stab at some sort of answer. I think the answer is something like this. In order to create a society in which we are truly free to deal openly with debatable facts and issues, there are some convictions we must all hold firmly and never compromise. First, as our wise founder, James Madison, recognized, in a free democracy, there will always be what he called faction. Groups and individuals with differing interests, ideas, opinions, and points of view. Disagreement and dissent will never go away. Today, the left has forgotten that. Progressives think that if we are all properly educated and informed, not misinformed, somehow we will all agree. But that is false. We will not. So democracy rests on accepting and dealing with disagreement, with dissent. How should we do that? In my humble opinion, with the utmost restraint and tolerance, properly understood, both official and unofficial. Now, of course, there are limits to tolerance when it comes to rank antisocial behavior, deviance, license lawbreaking, and those nastier experiments in living. Tolerance, properly understood, means somehow living with our political opponents, with respecting and accepting a loyal opposition, which can be criticized harshly if necessary, but which should not be banished or punished or persecuted or violently targeted. And we need to revise the concept of grudging tolerance, which is deeply conservative. We must reject the simple-minded poles of celebration versus prohibition into which our society today has regrettably fallen. There is an in-between, a vital one. I almost never agree with Ezra Klein, but in his testament to Charlie Kirk, he did get one thing right. He wrote, quote, "A taste for disagreement is a virtue in a democracy. It should not be seen as an existential threat, as it so often is today, but rather as our lifeblood, as central to our precious way of life. So it is not just a virtue, it is a necessity, without which democracy is not even possible. And I might add that a real university fit for purpose, discovering knowledge, seeking truth, is not possible either. But what does this mean in actual practice? In an iconic quote from his first inaugural in 1861 to a deeply divided country, Lincoln said to and of his fellow citizens, quote, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." Affection, today, that is a counsel of perfection. And even friendship may sometimes be a bridge too far for those with very different political views, although I personally don't think it should be. At the very least, we should not ghost, shun, ostracize, or even, with few exceptions, fire those whose opinions we reject. And I have never done so, although it has been done repeatedly to me. And certainly we should not assault our opponents. Political violence is never acceptable in a polity that claims to be democratic. As they say in kindergarten, use your words. Now, what I have said should be obvious, but it is not. Most of the world has not gotten this memo. They punish, torture, imprison, penalize, and kill their enemies. The internecine violence in Palestine today is a case in point, and it is not exceptional. No society that behaves this way will ever be a viable democracy. People don't like to hear that, but it is so. Today, growing numbers of Americans accept political violence, and we have long had a cancel culture that punishes dissent in our universities and in the workplace and in society at large, and we still have it today. Now, another vital component of tolerance properly understood is the firm rejection of what our Supreme Court has called the heckler's veto. What is that? It is the power of those who are upset, offended, or affronted by opinions or facts to curtail or even banish their expression. You will never hear lefties use that phrase, heckler's veto, and you will never read it in the New York Times. The heckler's veto has acquired new power through the clever extension of the harm principle, Mill's idea that the regulation of speech is only justified to prevent injury to others. But by invoking a listener's mental and psychological distress from the content of speech, the enemies of free expression have weaponized the harm principle and extended it to shut down objectionable ideas. This weapon is potent, it is powerful, it is hard to defeat. Are there not mental or emotional harms that seem real and plausible that even freedom lovers are willing to recognize? Jonathan Haidt claims that too much screen time stunts children. Others say that harsh parenting predisposes to mental illness. But what is different about current abuses of the harm principle is that they apply to a particular kind of distress, the mental upset that supposedly results from the exposure to unwelcome facts, ideas, and opinions. And even if these effects are somehow real, and that is debatable, they are certainly exaggerated, our vital commitment to free expression means that we must disregard them. As Jay Cost at AEI has recently argued, reactions to offensive opinions should not count as harms to be balanced against the rights of free expression. The freedom to express ideas, even very unpopular ones, must be virtually absolute. Without that commitment, call it a convention, if you will, free thought will quickly erode and will ultimately disappear. Now, in the final few minutes of my talk, I want to address a question that I have often been asked during my journey as an academic dissident, which is this: why do you stay in the academy? Why persist? Why endure the slings and arrows of your schools and colleagues' contempt and name-calling and ostracism? Why not just retire and ride off to the sunset? I am in my 70s, my kids are grown. Why do I need this thesaurus? Well, the answer is, I don't. I can't claim it is fun or pleasant, but it is necessary. The answer for me is pretty simple. Someone has to do it, and do it for the students. The students desperately need to hear a different voice, and for now, I provide it. Why does that motivate me? I grew up in an observant Jewish family, and central to my parents' understanding of their faith and identity was the concept of the covenant, the bris, the tie that binds past to present to future generations. With gratitude towards our ancestors for their precious gifts brought with great sacrifice and travail, unearned and undeserved by us, and the forward-looking obligation to preserve, protect, and defend that inheritance for our posterity, that was never far from their minds. When I started delving into conservative ideas, I read Edmund Burke with a shock of recognition and discovered that he too understood the concept of the covenant. of the vital moral connection between generations among, as he put it, quote, those who are dead, those who are living, and those who are yet to be born. He spoke of our debt towards the people who have come before and built our society, and of what is due to those coming after. He warned against, quote, committing waste on the inheritance, leaving to those who come after a ruin instead of a habitation. In remaining at Penn Law, I seek in my small way to fend off that ruin and preserve that habitation, to honor our great debt to the past by passing it on. That preservation of past greatness, as advocated by the Jewish Bris and Edmund Burke's Covenant, is of course under ferocious attack in society today, and never more so than in the university. Needless to say, I strongly dissent, and I know there are students and citizens who do too, and I hear from them, from students, parents, and citizens from all over the country. In closing, I would like to read just a few lines from some of the notes that I have received very recently. One from a parent of a student and one from a Fordham student. An email from the father of a student in my conservative thought class reads as follows, quote, this is just a quick note to tell you how thankful I am for you. I am just an ordinary man living in a very small and poor town in southern Georgia. That is where my son John, who took your class last year, was raised. Your strength and your conservative teaching have affected John more than you could possibly know. He is a better man because of you, Professor Wax. Another is from a former student, the last, in my conservative thought class. I could read a dozen, but I'm not going to. One who told me that his lefty family, including his pastor father in Cincinnati, have shunned him. He writes, quote, it is difficult to put into words how grateful I am that you were my law professor. I never imagined that one class would have such a profound impact on my life. You were the only professor who ever made me feel like I could truly explore any idea in your classroom, and your class fundamentally changed how I see the world. I learned that rationalism cannot possibly know as much as the inherited wisdom of tradition can teach. I learned that culture shapes destinies far more than welfare checks ever could. I learned that there is no magic dirt, and if we believe the Western way of life is worth preserving, then we have to be the ones to preserve it. And most importantly, I learned by example how to stay faithful to truth and stand up to the coercive powers that seek to suppress it. Your trials and tribulations at Penn Law at the hands of so-called compassionate progressives remind me of Hamilton's foreboding quote from Federalist 1. Quote, a dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the specious mask of zeal for the rights of the people than under the forbidden appearance of zeal for firmness and efficiency in government. History will teach us that the former has been found a much more certain road to despotism than the latter. Yes, indeed, history is teaching us that as we speak. Such trenchant insights from our founders, from the students who honor them, as well as the accolades I have gratefully received from all you tonight, are what keep me going. And I do plan to keep going to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Please welcome back Roger Kimball.
I'm not sure whose talk this is. It'd be nice if I could be like James Bond and everywhere I went, Bach would play. Well, congratulations, Amy. You certainly deserve that award. And thank you for those back-stiffening remarks. I'm honored that Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas is with us tonight to introduce his old, by which of course I mean his former, teacher Charles Kesler. And yes, we have yet another brief video, the last, by way of explanatory propedeutic.
For more than a quarter century, Encounter Books has promoted a love of liberty and the values of Western civilization. Its publishing program has helped to underwrite the intellectual resources necessary for the flourishing of American culture and political life. The Encounter Prize for Advancing American Ideals is given in recognition of those who have made conspicuous contributions to this endeavor. Tonight, Encounter Books is pleased to honor Charles R. Kesler for preserving the intellectual foundations of modern conservatism. Kesler is an eminent scholar at Claremont McKenna College, a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, and a prodigious writer and editor. At age 16, as a precocious young high school student in West Virginia, Kesler managed to secure an interview with William F. Buckley, Jr., who would become his lifelong friend and mentor. He went on to study under the renowned Harvey Mansfield at Harvard University before joining the faculty of Claremont McKenna, where he met his next great teacher, Harry Jaffa. Kesler gained a deep understanding of the American founding from these intellectual giants, knowledge that he today imparts to a new generation, both on campus and through the Claremont Institute's fellowship programs. Yet Kesler's most influential contribution may be his work at the Claremont Review of Books, which he has edited for a quarter century and developed into one of the most indispensable publications on the right. Each issue showcases the very best thinking in conservatism, ideas that shape the movement and drive policy at the highest levels of power in Washington, D.C. Through his teaching, writing, and editorship, Kesler has helped to both ground and advance the great tradition of American conservative political thought. Please join Encounter Books in honoring Charles R. Kesler with the Encounter Prize for Advancing American Ideals.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome United States Senator from Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton.
Good evening. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce tonight's recipient of the Encounter Prize for Advancing American Ideals, Charles Kesler. I first met Charles as a young Claremont fellow, too young to even have a drink legally. Not that Charles ever heeded such artificial conventions. Appeals to a higher law in such matters. Ever since, I've benefited from his counsel, his wisdom, and his friendship. I've always marveled that Charles has never, as far as I know, met a stranger or made an enemy. That's quite a feat in our academic and political life today. Believe me. In earlier days, he bridged philosophical divides between, for instance, Harvey Mansfield at Harvard and Harry Jaffa at Claremont. Today, he often serves as a bridge between the pre-Trump Republican Party and the president's MAGA movement. Between, if you will, Ronald Reagan and Bill Buckley on the one hand, and Donald Trump on the other. From the outside, these divides may seem small, but from the inside, they can, at times, feel like a chasm. Yet Charles has remained an unfailingly cheerful and respected ambassador for occasionally erstwhile friends and allies, calling them back together when temporarily at daggers drawn over this or that fleeting thing, reminding everyone of our shared devotion to America and the spirit of liberty. Put differently, and somewhat strangely for a professor, Charles exercises prudence, the highest virtue of a statesman, according to Aristotle. Prudence is not merely common sense or sound instincts. Prudence demands both a deep knowledge of the highest things and the practical wisdom to deliberate well about those things in concrete circumstances. Charles is our leading authority on the Federalist Papers, but one might also say that he displays the prudence of Publius, the nom de plume of the authors of those papers. These authors were hard-nosed politicians, after all, writing newspaper op-eds to win a vote in a heated political controversy, not philosophers writing a treatise in their study. Yet those essays have stood the test of time as the foundational work on American politics, precisely because they begin with first principles and reason prudentially about our liberty, our dignity, and our happiness, to borrow from Federalist 1. Through his writing and his teaching, Charles has similarly explicated and defended our Constitution and transmitted its legacy to the next generation. And Charles has held together and grown a patriotic coalition for liberty that still wins elections today, just as it did in the decisive election of 1788. I can therefore think of no more deserving honoree than my friend and mentor, Charles Kesler.
Well, thank you, Tom. The thing about students is you have to pick the good ones to be your students, you know, and attract them. And I think those remarks, which I'm, of course, flattered by, but I'm also very impressed by, not on my own behalf, but as the testimony of a senator's understanding of active American politics and past American politics. The Senate, of course, used to be the world's greatest deliberative body. I think Senator Cotton would probably be one of the first to say it isn't so great or so deliberative anymore. And that is not a problem of the senators per se, although it is indirectly. But it is a big problem for American government. It's a big problem for self-government in our kind of republic, at least. At any rate, I am delighted to see my old friend and student here and to acknowledge those wonderful and warm remarks. My thanks also to Roger Kimball and his merry band of ink-stained wretches at Encounter Books for this generous prize for advancing American ideals. I only wish I had a better idea of what an American ideal is. In Louis Auchincloss's short, acidulous biography of Woodrow Wilson, he quotes Wilson's Secretary of the Navy as saying of the president that he was a man of high ideals, but of no moral principles. That observation caught something important about modern times and modern character: the replacement of morals by ideals, of rules of right and wrong and judgments of goodness and badness, by romantic aspirations and sentimental celebrations of how liberated and autonomous we are, even self-created, to use a word that one finds these days on the left in everyone from Barack Obama's autobiography to the latest postmodern testimonies. These days we are more idealist than ever, but are we more moral than ever? As Bill Buckley said long ago about Teddy Kennedy, the senator from Massachusetts was so scrupulous about not imposing his religious views on others that he would not impose them even on himself. Permit me, please, to thank also all of my old friends and colleagues and some new friends who are here tonight. It is wonderful to see you, as always. And privately, I have a note for Senator Cotton as well, which I don't want to omit, which is that I have an old paper of yours, which is long overdue. I've graded it. It's ready. I won't release it yet because of the Washington Post. You know, I mean, it's an A paper, but they won't be interested. So, but I believe I can say that it, without violating federal privacy laws, which I would never violate, that it concerns the Federalist, about which his senior thesis was a landmark as well. Tom has been thinking seriously about the Federalist for a long time. And I can't discuss the Federalist today because there's a government shutdown, and no federal employee could be expected to care about that in a parlous situation like this. In fact, this is the first time I have visited Washington when the government was, as they say in the doomsday media, shut down. Welcome to the state of nature. It doesn't look as I imagined it. During COVID-19, the Mandarins easily distinguished between essential and non-essential government services. But these days, the services all seem essential, except, of course, for the National Guard defending law and order in our fractious inner cities. One of Oscar Wilde's characters famously remarked that to lose one parent may be regarded as a misfortune, to lose both looks like carelessness. One may say something similar, and I intend to say it right now, concerning national holidays. We are barely holding on to Columbus Day these days as a paid federal holiday, and we have almost involuntarily added Juneteenth, sometimes called Emancipation Day or the Second Independence Day, as a new federal holiday. But have you ever heard of Forefathers Day? Forefathers Day. Not many people have. Forefathers Day is nowadays celebrated in parts of New England, particularly around Plymouth, Massachusetts, on December the 22nd, to commemorate the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock on December 21st, 1620. Before the Civil War, this holiday was observed nationally, or at least in many states outside of New England, and often sponsored by what were called New England societies. Forefathers Day served as the occasion for patriotic oratory, with memorable addresses by John Quincy Adams in 1802, I'm going to say something about that in a moment, and Daniel Webster in 1820, commemorating the Pilgrims' contribution to American republicanism and civil and religious liberties. By the 1840s and 1850s, the holiday had become associated with the anti-slavery cause, and that movement's sectionalism sharpened its edge. Almost every leader of that cause, from William Lloyd Garrison to Frederick Douglass to Owen Lovejoy, gave major Forefathers' Day addresses. Abraham Lincoln, that cautious in his own way politician, did not. Though as president during the Civil War, he would later designate a national day of thanks that would perform some of the same functions with less regional edge. And in the Gettysburg Address, he picked up on the theme of forefathers, saying, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent. The New York Times' 1619 Project criticizes the Declaration and the Constitution as systemically pro-slavery documents. That tired argument would find fewer gullible takers, presumably, if the counter-arguments had remained associated with and honored by something like Forefathers' Day. Before we may be properly grateful for our blessings as a country, after all, we need to know what we should be grateful for. In that respect, as I predicted, let me offer some comments on John Quincy Adams's oration at Plymouth, one of his least well-known but most helpful dissertations for our own very confused age. Adams, the son of the President John Adams, and himself to be the 6th President of the United States, begins with the old Socratic or Roman point that, quote, veneration for our forefathers and love for our posterity are linked. Man, therefore, he says, was not made for himself alone. This is a line, of course, echoing Plato, Cicero, and many others. Man was made for his country by the obligations of the social contract. This is Adams. He was made for his species by the Christian duties of universal charity. He was made for all ages past by the sentiment of reverence. And he was made for all future times by the impulse of affection for his progeny. Such commemorations link us from our tiny place in time and space to the universe at large. They introduce, Adams goes on to say, the sages and heroes of ages past to the notice and emulation of succeeding times. They are at once testimonials of our gratitude and schools of virtue to our children. It's a beautiful case for patriotic and intellectual education, intellectual and moral education, really, of future American generations, never needed more than in our contemporary circumstances. Thank you. Adams thanks you. Adams goes on to pay tribute to the Pilgrims' political and religious learning, based partly on their experience in exile in Holland and as distilled into the Mayflower Compact. He says, this is perhaps the only instance in human history of that positive original social compact which speculative philosophers have imagined as the only legitimate source of government. Here, he says, was a unanimous and personal assent by all the individuals of the community to the association by which they became a nation. There is also the very simple point, but very rarely heard these days, in the age of the 1619 Project and of much scholarship, of course, on the original sins of the American people, that on the Mayflower, there were no slaves. The ship that arrived in Plymouth was not a ship. It had a few indentured servants, but there were no slaves on board that original seed of the American Republic. Now, John Quincy Adams is, I have to admit, a very 19th century kind of guy. His sentences are long, Latinate, intricate, and they are, even when they are morally powerful, they are a little bit not to our taste these days. Nonetheless, he is, in certain respects, extremely au courant, extremely current. In fact, I would go so far as to say Adams, in this famous oration of his on the landing of the Pilgrims, anticipated the party platform of Zoran Mamdani. You may have heard of this fellow. He's running for mayor. He soon will be probably elected mayor of New York City. As you may know, the Pilgrims' original political economy in their tiny community was communist. They experimented with the community of goods and of labor, which, as Adams writes, fanciful politicians from the days of Plato to those of Rousseau have recommended as the fundamental law of a perfect republic. Communism of property, maybe communism beyond property, women, children, family, and so forth. This theory results, he says, it must be acknowledged, from principles of reasoning most flattering to the human character, that we could be capable of such disinterested unselfishness. Yet Adams parts company from the idealistic Mr. Mamdani. A wiser and more useful philosophy, says Adams, directs us to consider man according to the nature in which he was formed, subject to infirmities which no wisdom can remedy, to weaknesses which no institution can strengthen, to vices which no legislation can correct. Hence, it becomes obvious, he concludes, that separate property is the natural and indisputable right of separate exertion, that community of goods without community of toil is oppressive and unjust, that it counteracts the laws of nature, which prescribe that only he who sows the seed shall reap the harvest, that it discourages all energy by destroying its rewards and makes the most virtuous and active members of society the slaves and drudges of the worst. That's a pretty good critique of communism, I would say. Finally, Adams foresaw and dismissed the arguments for what we these days sometimes term ownership forgiveness. Those phony ceremonies at the beginning of public meetings and so forth, apologizing to the Indians for appropriating their aboriginal lands. He dismissed such claims forcefully and memorably, and very bracingly, I have to admit. What is the right of a huntsman to the forest of 1,000 miles over which he has accidentally ranged in the quest of prey? Shall the liberal bounties of Providence to the race of man be monopolized by one of 10,000 for whom they were created? And he's getting now a little racy. Shall the exuberant bosom of the common mother, amply adequate to the nourishment of millions, be claimed exclusively by a few hundred of her offspring? Shall the lordly savage not only disdain the virtues and enjoyments of civilization himself, but shall he control the civilization of a world? These are excellent questions which deserve wise consideration as we advance the ideals of American democracy among the lordly savages of our own century. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles, for that extremely thoughtful and illuminating reflection. I've got to look up that speech by John Quincy Adams. Well, to alter Churchill, we are not at the end, but we are nearing the beginning of the end of our revelry. To mark the conclusion of the scripted part of our festivities, let me recall Hegel's observation that the owl of Minerva takes flight only with the coming of the dusk. Perhaps the poet Horace was making a similar point when, commemorating Octavian's victory at the Battle of Actium, he began one of his most famous odes with the imperative, nunc est bibendum. In any event, please welcome my friend Rick Graber, the President and CEO of the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, who will offer a suitable libation for this Janus-faced moment.
Thank you, Roger, and good evening. On behalf of all of us at the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation, thank you so much for the opportunity to celebrate with you this evening. We gather not simply to honor a publishing house, but to salute a community of authors, editors, and readers who passionately believe that ideas can change a nation if they are communicated courageously, effectively, and articulately. Right now, we need these ideas more than ever, for we're in a troubled time. Many of you in this room, for whom the power of the pen is central to your profession, indeed to your very being, feel it more acutely than most. The words you choose, the ideas that you so eloquently espouse, and the truths you hold to be self-evident make you a target, not just of cancellation, but sadly, of violence. Given the danger, it must be tempting at times to self-censor, to choose the comfort of consensus, or to avoid the public square altogether. Yet Encounter has never been one to adhere to or demand conformity. Of course, the opposite is true. You've insisted that debate is in the public interest and that dissent is not a defect in our republic, but rather one of its strengths. From its earliest days, Encounter has been built on the courage of authors who were unafraid to articulate revolutionary ideas, voices willing to challenge prevailing orthodoxies and to defend truth even when unpopular. That foundation gave Encounter its distinct character, a home for bold thinkers whose words have shaped debates far beyond the printed page. Encounter has stood as a beacon for those whose ideas might otherwise not see the light of day, and that matters. For the United States will only remain exceptional so long as the institutions that strengthen civil society, defend the rule of law, inform citizens, and elevate free enterprise are restored, strengthened, and protected. All of that begins with the ideas that shape the American mind and turn its heart toward freedom. To the authors who risk reputations to pursue truth, to the editors who sharpen arguments, to the staff who ensure that the prose that comes across their desks will outlast news cycles, thank you. To Roger Kimball and the Encounter team, your stewardship reminds us that publishing, at its best, is a civic art. May Encounter continue to champion the permanent things, liberty ordered by virtue, traditions that root us, and the institutions that cultivate character, such as family, church, and neighborhoods. May you continue to enable readers to see more clearly and to love this country more deeply. So here's to Encounter Books and its fearless defense of ideas. Thank you for keeping the lights on for the American mind. To Encounter. Cheers. The bar is once again open. For further cocktails and conversation, please enjoy. Have a great evening.